Someone once asked me, Steve, do you think the pyramids were built by aliens? And I sighed and simply pointed out that 100 years ago people could make steam engines with their very hands, but today the average person doesn't even know how to start a lawnmower. Earlier in my life I spent 25 years in military service, and in that time I noted that in the face of long and arduous tasks, never to underestimate the ability of groups of people to be extremely inventive in the manner that they face the work. I always attributed this to the genius of the bone idol, of which I was one of them. But perhaps there's a collective ability in mankind to make big problems simpler. Hence to the creation of tools, from the bone mallet through to language. I think it's important not to disrespect the achievements and hard work of our forefathers in favour of a pile of fanciful horse manure. And there seems to be a lot of that at the moment, particularly on the internet. It seems in the 21st century that truths are no longer occulted. They're rather camouflaged in a forest of camel dung. And this dung is good, so long as it keeps the profane out of trouble. And regarding the nature of this lecture, I'll simply say that it is speculative in nature, with the hope of inspiring the reader rather than loading them up with nonsense like aliens did it with anti-gravity trumpets. I'm not going to be doing that, but I do have another lecture where I will be explaining that. It's already written, I just need to film it. Time. Yeah, it's difficult sometimes. Anyway, getting on to it. Here's part one, small beginnings. For millennia, people have wondered at the Great Pyramid at Giza and all of the other pyramids around it, and they've thought to themselves, how was it built? How long did it take? Who built it? Why did they build it? What's the purpose of the pyramid? And why build it at that particular location? In this lecture, I'll attempt to answer some of those questions and offer some speculative evidence for my reasoning. It's difficult, however, to discuss such things openly, as doctrine tends to get in the way, and I'll explain this, where zealots, either religious or academic, blindly obscure the obvious in plain sight in an attempt to protect their ego, their beliefs, or even their funding. And I politely ask that you keep an open mind during this particular lecture. And let's not forget that the archaeologists that come up with all of these wonderful theories and ideas, they're not engineers. If they were, we probably would have come to very different conclusions. The Great Pyramid of Egypt is said to be the last surviving wonder of the ancient world. Listen to that again. The Great Pyramid, not the Great Pyramids of Egypt. This statement signifies that there was once a time when this structure stood on its own on the Giza plateau, accompanied by other great wonders around the world, others of which have faded now into legend. Before we delve into Egypt, we have to answer some questions, and I need to build a superstructure perfect in its parts, so to speak. So here comes the foundation. Throughout the ages, man has revered sources of fresh water since the beginning of time, and why not? We need water to survive. Water sources have always been seen as important, particularly in arid regions. Indeed, a certain kudos has been throughout the ages attached to freshwater springs and wells in particular. In the UK alone, there are over 600 known surviving ancient well sites, referred to as holy wells. And we don't just find them in the UK, we find them across the world. So how does that work? Why is that so important? Well, you can drink from a river or a pond, but the water might be foul. Freshwater springs and wells are generally a cleaner source of water, with the added bonus of being free from crocodiles and hippopotamus and what have you. In arid regions in particular, fresh water, a spring or a well, would have been a life-sustaining source, and it would stand to reason that man would strive to control such an important resource. One can as such realise why such springs or wells were enclosed or had little structures built over them. due to the importance of the site. The most powerful, unorganised, would take possession of that commodity, and who in ancient times were more powerful than the priests and ministers of almost all religions? As priests do what they do, it's likely that any site under their control would be a good place to pray or pay devotion to their deities, and these well sites would be no exception. Indeed, given the importance of life-giving water, those well sites may have had the biggest walls around them, and as such may have evolved into the first primordial temples. Over time, the importance of the actual water itself would have intertwined with the ritual and the goings-on of that particular religion. And the original reason for securing that particular location, that being the water, it simply gives life, might have been long forgotten. Even today, you'll note how the importance of water is celebrated in churches, represented by a font of holy water. We're going to go to a place called Silbury now. Now there's a place called Avebury in the UK, which is the site of the largest remaining stone circle in the world. Avebury is impressive. It has an entire village inside the stones. However, there's a more enigmatic structure nearby which you may not be aware of. And this lesser known absolute wonder is known as Silbury Hill. Many people simply pass by Silbury without a second thought, without realising that it's one of the largest artificial prehistoric mounds in Europe, possibly dating back to 2400 BC. And that's the same time frame as the Great Pyramid of Giza. It's located about a mile to the south of the Avebury Stones. Now, as I mentioned, Silbury is called a mound, and it's designated an earthwork or a prehistoric mound. And as a point of fact, it's constructed not of earth, but approximately 500,000 tonnes of locally quarried chalk blocks and rubble. It has a mass about 1/5 of the Great Pyramid at Giza. Now, one cannot fail to notice Silbury's similarity to pyramids worldwide. Now, it's not a true pyramid shape, it's more conical in shape, but let's not forget that the term pyramid is used to describe certain structures, particularly those in Mesoamerica, few of which, technically none, are actually geometrical pyramids in shape. At 40 metres high, I'm going to state that Silbury is indeed a pyramid. It's much taller than many accepted pyramids. And the reason I'm stating that Silbury is a pyramid will become much clearer later in this lecture. The BBC filmed excavations at Silbury Mound as part of the Chronicle series from 1968 to 1970. Now, this dig was not, however, the first attempt to uncover the secrets of Silbury Hill. The Duke of Northumberland sank a shaft into the mound in 1777, and a tunnel was dug in 1849, while in 1922, the father of the archaeological method, Sir William Flinders Petrie, cut a large trench into the base of the mound. He did so in the latter period of his life, after spending 40 long years as an archaeologist and engineer in Egypt. He returned to the UK and he studied Silbury Hill. Such is the importance of this site. The BBC archaeologists hope to find a tomb or a burial site inside the mound that is Silbury. But this was doomed from the beginning, as like many pyramids, Silbury is not a tomb. It is a ritual site built on top of a freshwater spring. And that's exactly what the BBC archaeologists found. They found a ritual site built on top of a freshwater spring. Silbury is a pyramid built on top of an ancient holy well, and they call it a mound. Absolute sacrilege. Perhaps we should consider parity and refer henceforth to the Great Mound of Giza. But anyway, I digress. Hello everybody and welcome to Bright Weird. This is part 2 of the Holy Well, Holy Temple series. So if you haven't seen part 1 yet, get yourself back and watch it, because otherwise none of it will make sense. In fact, none of it's going to make sense anyway. So just get yourself back and watch part 1. Anyway, without any further ado, this is part 2 of Holy Well, Holy Temple. So, 2 more temple. I don't doubt that some pyramids around the world were built as sepulchres to a massive ego, but not all of these great structures are tombs. Finding a burial inside is not sufficient evidence to designate a site as a tomb. Now, just because Admiral Lord Nelson is buried in St Paul's Cathedral, it doesn't mean that this structure was erected as his tomb. He was merely buried there as an act of reverence for his service. Even local to me in Cornwall, Truro Cathedral has several eminent persons of wealth buried within its walls. But we're confident that Truro Cathedral was not built for the Bassett family. The purpose of Truro, like many cathedrals, is religious devotion, the site being a literal spiritual machine. Built in this instance in Truro on the convergence of 3 rivers, hence the name Truro. Location is the key. Why do you suppose that those masons of old chose to build a cathedral at a particular location? Now, it's likely that those medieval masons, in choosing the site, were in possession of an ancient knowledge passed down from chisel to maul. Certain locations on the Earth's surface have been designated holy or special since time immemorial. This could be due to the presence of what's known as ley line convergence or Schumann resonance sites, where 7.83 Hz naturally comes from the ground, that's the Earth's resonant frequency. Or perhaps there was an ancient water source nearby or a freshwater spring on the site. Whatever it is, these special holy sites have throughout the ages been marked by stone circles, quoits, temples, and yes, it's a little known fact that all of the cathedrals built by the masons of old were indeed built on the site of a former stone monument. One could argue that Christianity built cathedrals at pagan sites to inherit a ready-made congregation, and yes, I can accept that on the surface. However, the truth is much deeper. These special places are known as thin places or portals. Special places where the veil to higher dimensions of consciousness is a little thinner. And you can have a look at my other lecture that I've done online about portals if you want to know a bit more about that. Now that we have the preamble out of the way, we can venture into the land of the Black Earth, Kemet, or as it's now known, Egypt. Kemet literally means black earth or black land, and it comes from the black life-giving silt deposits left each year by the inundation of the River Nile. Incidentally, the name Egypt comes from the Greek Egyptos, which is the Greek pronunciation of the ancient Egyptian name Huat Ka Ptahi, or Mansion of the Spirit of Ptah, originally the name of the city of Memphis. So the Great Mound of Kemet is located near the modern city of Cairo, a place next to the Giza Plateau. And on that plateau, you will find the enigmatic Great Pyramid of Giza and the other pyramids that are there with it. Only one of those pyramids on the Giza Plateau is designated the Great One, and it's the last remaining wonder of the ancient world. Now, it's said to have been built by the pharaoh Khufu, or Cheops, in a mere 23 years. There are some problems with that, which I'll explain. There are many impressive pyramids in the area. One almost identical in size to the naked eye is the Pyramid of Khafre, which sits right next to the so-called Great Pyramid. Khafre looks more impressive, and it's still got its casing stones on the top, and it's often mistaken for being the Great Pyramid. This is the middle pyramid of the 3 remaining ones on the Giza Plateau. But in the wider area, quite nearby actually, there are other pyramids arguably as impressive as that designated the Great Pyramid. In particular, those located at Saqqara and Dashur, which is only 18 miles from the Giza Plateau. Indeed, you can see the pyramids at Saqqara from the Giza Plateau if you look to the south. Are these structures not so great? Why is only that one to the north on the Giza Plateau designated the Great Pyramid? Academia states that the first pyramid of Egypt was one called the Step Pyramid, which is at Saqqara, which is, as I said, was 18 miles to the south of Giza Plateau. Now, the Step Pyramid is not a true pyramid, it's more of a mastaba placed on top of a mastaba. One interesting note about the Step Pyramid, it's got 6 kilometres of tunnels underneath it. 6 kilometres. Back on the Giza Plateau, something predated even the Great Pyramid. Let us consider for a moment that something predated even the Step Pyramid at Saqqara and stood alone 18 miles away on the Giza Plateau, the site now occupied by the Great Pyramid. I'm aware that this flies in the face of current belief, which states that the pyramids at Saqqara and Dashur were built before the Great Pyramid at Giza. The Step Pyramid around 2780 BC by King Joseph and later pyramids by Snefru. Historically, the Great Pyramid of Giza has been attributed to a pharaoh called Khufu or Cheops, whose reign was generally dated at 23 years, between 2589 and 2566 BC. This is based on authors of classical antiquity such as Herodotus and the Diodorus Siculus. It should be noted that during the Middle Ages, other people were accredited with the construction of the Great Pyramid. For example, Joseph from the Book of Genesis, Nimrod, or the legendary King Sarid of Salhuk. Now, I don't doubt for a moment that Khufu had a hand in building work on the Giza Plateau, or that he constructed great works such as the Great Pyramid himself, but he likely did not build the Great Pyramid from scratch in only 23 years. Hello everybody and welcome to Bright Weird. This is part 3 of the Holy Well, Holy Temple series. So if you've not seen part 1 or part 2, get yourself back and watch them, otherwise you might not get the full picture, you might miss the arc, so to speak. Interesting subject this one because it's about impossible numbers. Now I'm not going to discuss sacred geometry or the fact that the Great Pyramid is at the centre of the Earth's landmass, or that the latitude and longitude lines up perfectly with the speed of light in meters per second. I'm not going to be doing any of that stuff. What I'm going to be doing in this very short video is talking about nearly impossible construction times and the fact that the archaeologists who came up with those timescales are not engineers. In fact, they probably wouldn't even know how to dig a well. But I surely know how to dig a hole for myself with this video. Anyway, look, here it is. This is Holy Well, Holy Temple, Part 3, Impossible Numbers. Now, I don't doubt for a moment that Khufu had a hand in building work on the Giza Plateau, or that he constructed great works such as the Great Pyramid himself. He likely did not build the Great Pyramid from scratch in only 23 years. Let's talk about some numbers. The Great Pyramid originally stood at a height of 146.6 metres, which is 481 feet. It's a little bit shorter now because the top is missing. It now stands at 138.5 metres or 449 feet. It's estimated to contain around 5.5 million tonnes of limestone and 8,000 tonnes of granite. Now that 8,000 tonnes of granite was transported from Aswan, which is 800 kilometres away. There's approximately, it's estimated, 500,000 tonnes of mortar in the Great Pyramid as well. It's estimated, and estimates vary, that the Great Pyramid weighs 6.8 million tonnes and contains 2.3 million limestone blocks, most of which are the weight of a large family car, the weight of a Range Rover. The internal structure of the Great Pyramid, there's a place called the King's Chamber, which is impressive, and the blocks that make up the King's Chamber were hewn from the granite of Aswan and transported 540 miles, 800 kilometres to the pyramid site. That's a long way to move really big blocks. Some of those granite blocks weigh up to 80 tonnes. Each granite block weighs the same as 30 Range Rovers. Try moving one Range Rover without any wheels, and then consider the problem times 30 over a 540-mile distance. It beggars belief. The whole of the Great Pyramid was originally cased in fine Tura limestone, which was stripped in antiquity by Luddites to build modern-day Cairo, used as an open quarry by people who defined the very phrase, familiarity breeds contempt. Now, there are an estimated 2.3 million limestone blocks in the Great Pyramid. The average rate of a limestone block in the Great Pyramid is 2.3 metric tons, and it took approximately 23 years to build it. There's a lot of 23s there. In Gematria, 23 is 2 plus 3, which equals 5, which in occult circles is a pentagram. So anyway, look, that's a digression. Back to the numbers. So if my maths is correct, for just the limestone blocks, based on 23 years, that gives us a requirement to quarry, shape and move and place blocks at the following rate. So you've got 2.3 million blocks divided by 23 years. So that's you need to quarry, shape, move and place 100,000 blocks per year. Each one of those blocks weighs the same as a Range Rover, 2.3 tons. Let's take that 100,000 blocks and divide it by 365. That gives us 273 blocks per day that need to be quarried, shaped, moved and placed into the Great Pyramid. Let's take that 273 blocks and divide it by 24 hours. 11.4 blocks needed to be quarried, shaped, moved and placed into the Great Pyramid every hour based on a 24-hour day, on a 7-day-a-week routine with no delays. But you can't work without light. Therefore, let's set it around an 8-hour day. 273 blocks divided by 8 hours means that you're going to have to quarry, shape, move and place 34 blocks per hour. And that's without any delays at all. Or to put it another way, 34 blocks divided by 60, and that gives us one 2.5 ton block needed to be quarried, shaped, moved and placed every 2 minutes for 8 hours a day, 365 days a year for 23 years, without any bad weather, without any delays, without any problems. Or in modern terms, that's like 2.3 million Range Rovers without wheels had to be dug out of the ground by hand, shaped into neat Range Rover sized blocks by hand, dragged from the quarry without wheels by hand and piled up by hand without cranes over a 23-year period. That's a hell of a scrapyard, but I digress. As for the granite blocks from Aswan, that's another story. They're fewer in number, but much heavier. They're 80 tons or 40 Range Rovers in weight each. Let's not forget this particular flavour of stone from Aswan was transported 800 kilometres or 540 miles. It's just absolutely bonkers. It makes no sense. I mean, the narrative that's put out there, 23 years, 2.3 million blocks, it just does not make any sense at all. Now, I don't doubt for a moment that Khufu had a hand in building work on the Giza plateau, or that he constructed great works such as the Great Pyramid himself. He likely did not build the Great Pyramid from scratch in only 23 years. Hello everybody and welcome to part 4 of Holy Well, Holy Temple. If you've not seen parts 1, 2 and 3 yet, go away and watch them. Or don't. I don't care. But do not watch this episode unless you've seen part 1, 2 and 3, or it won't make any sense. In this episode, we're going to be discussing what was on the site of the Great Pyramid before the Great Pyramid was built. This is part 4 of Holy Well, Holy Temple, As Within. Now, I don't doubt for a moment that Khufu had a hand in building work on the Giza plateau, or that he constructed great works such as the Great Pyramid himself. Let's consider for a moment that academics are wrong and that Khufu did not build the Great Pyramid from scratch in a mere 23 years. His reign of 23 years is the only evidence for that figure. What I'm going to suggest now is controversial but illogical. So what we're looking at here is a topographic map of the Giza plateau, and you'll see that the Great Pyramid is not located on the highest point of the Giza plateau. It's about halfway down the hill, 60 metres above sea level. The highest point of the Giza plateau is a little bit further up the hill and sits at 105 metres above sea level. If Khufu wanted to make an impression, surely he would have built his pyramid on the highest point. Perhaps the site was not his choice. Perhaps he chose to build at that particular location because it was the site of a smaller, very special holy site, a primordial pyramid or mastaba that was already on that place to designate a special location on the earth. Now, if Khufu was enlarging an existing structure, that might be doable in 23 years. It should also be noted that the Great Pyramid isn't built on flat ground. There's a 15-metre high bedrock mound under the core of the Great Pyramid. A little above the highest point of the bedrock underneath the Great Pyramid is a vertical tunnel called the well shaft. It's the top of an extended well that sits at the bottom of an internal structure which is now called the Grand Gallery, and it's outside the passageway to what's called the Queen's Chamber. This is an important intersection inside the Great Pyramid, and it's no accident that the well shaft begins here. I'll go further and suggest that the well shaft is a very special place and was, in deepest antiquity, the location of a holy well. What we're looking at here is a picture taken from the bottom of the Grand Gallery inside the well shaft. Now, the well shaft descends from the Grand Gallery into the pyramid masonry and continues down into the bedrock below. The highest point of the bedrock is about 10 metres down the shaft. As the bedrock starts, there is a small natural cave called the grotto, which is still damp today. The grotto might, in antiquity, have been more important than any other part of the Great Pyramid. I propose that the well shaft is the key to the entire mystery. Consider that deep in the past, on top of this 15-metre high bedrock outcrop was a natural spring leading to a little grotto. Even though the River Nile was just a short distance away, this spring or well would have been considered clean or sacred or holy water. Around that spring, perhaps a little shrine was built, which may have grown over time into a small temple or mastaba, and later into a small primordial pyramid. The primary chapel in the primordial structure might be the room that we now call the Queen's Chamber. That room might be a lot older than what we realise. Consider that on the site of the Great Pyramid there was once a holy well, and like all holy wells it was enshrined. Over time, with the lowering of the water table, the original spring may have begun to dry up, and as such a well would have been sunk to chase down the holy water. This long dog-leg shaft, shown in this picture and labelled as the well shaft, reaches all the way down to an area known now as the subterranean chamber, a deep chamber underneath the Great Pyramid. Now, this chamber may have been a natural cave, or it might have been hollowed out in order to sink another, deeper subterranean well to further chase down the water. There is evidence of exploratory tunnels that lead to dead ends and a large pit in the subterranean chamber, which could be the remnant of a second ancient subterranean holy well. In antiquity, a pre-pyramid well site would have been presided over by priests or ministers of that ancient religion. Now, the lower subterranean chamber that exists today may over time have become an important subterranean ritual chamber, not simply a place just to go and get water. In 1817, Giovanni Caviglia excavated the pit in the subterranean chamber, and in 1838 John Perring excavated the pit further to 36 feet. Later, in 1880, Flinders Petrie noted that during heavy rain the subterranean chamber pit contained water. Let's talk about the well shaft all the way up to the Grand Gallery. The existing dog-legged well shaft leading to this lower chamber, although large, would have been difficult to navigate all but the fittest. I mean, you can climb down the well shaft. There are little indentations in it all the way down, which would be ideal for hand and foot, but you'd have to be extremely fit to climb down it into the subterranean chamber. It stands to reason then that if what we call the subterranean chamber became an important ritual site, it might have been necessary to sink another shaft, another access point into that ritual area. And perhaps this is why the descending passage was built. Long before the Great Pyramid was built, you've got a well site, you've got a well now going down to a subterranean cave or chamber, and then they just wanted to make a new access point down to it. So perhaps that's the purpose of the descending passage. With this descending passage built, the lower chamber would have become more accessible and may have grown in importance, particularly given the effort that would have gone into the construction of the descending passage. If you build it, they will come. The small temple or mastaba that might have been at the head of the original holy well may have been enlarged and a small chapel constructed, and then over time another mastaba placed on top of a mastaba until a small primordial pyramid existed at the site of the Great Pyramid at Giza. And inside this growing primordial temple, the chapel, known as the Queen's Chamber, would have required a little bit of airflow. Therefore, 2 air shafts were constructed as the pyramid got larger to make sure that there was airflow inside the structure. The air shafts tell a story, because the air shafts in the Queen's Chamber do not reach the outside of the current pyramid, but they would have done if the pyramid was smaller. This implies that at some point in history the structure was enlarged, whereupon the air shafts became redundant in the Queen's Chamber, and this redundancy is further proved as the Queen's Chamber air shafts were only recently discovered because they were plastered over in deep antiquity. They were discovered in 1872 by Wayman Dixon, who put a piece of wire through one of the joints in the plaster and realised that the wall sounded hollow in 2 places. He chiselled off the plaster and then found these redundant air shafts. Hello everybody and welcome to part 5 of Holy Well, Holy Temple. Now if you've not watched the first 4 parts of this series, go back and watch them, because this really isn't going to make any sense. You're going to think I'm jumping to conclusions. You need to watch those previous episodes for all of this to make sense. So don't watch any more unless you've seen the previous 4 episodes. Now we'll be posting this as an hour-long single unit that you can watch in a oneer if you want. But either way, don't go ahead and just watch this video on its own. I've been putting them on over a few weeks just to break them up into bite-sized chunks, for reasons I previously explained in other videos. But anyway, without any further ado, this is part 5 of Holy Well, Holy Temple. So in this episode, we're going to be talking about the size and shape of primordial pyramids that existed at the site of the Great Pyramid before it was built. Something that was there to enable Khufu to build the Great Pyramid in 23 years. He couldn't have built the whole thing in 23 years, it's too big a task. But if he was enlarging a structure that was already there, now that's probably doable in 23 years. Before I explain the size and the shape and the internal structure of previous primordial pyramids, first we need to discuss the size and shape of the current Great Pyramid and the internal layout of its chambers. So you can see a picture here of the current Great Pyramid at Giza, and the first chamber aspect that we're going to look at is called the King's Chamber. Now this is a large granite chamber with huge granite blocks, some of them weighing as much as 30 or 40 Range Rovers in weight. Think about that, each block that heavy, that they moved 540 miles from Aswan. So the King's Chamber is pretty much the highest structure in the pyramid, but you'll notice that it's off-centre. It's not in the centre of the pyramid, and there's a really good reason for that I'm going to explain today. in the King's Chamber there are two air shafts coming off, one to the north and one to the south. Now, for millennia, these air shafts were filled up with desert sand and debris, and it made it extremely difficult to breathe inside the Great Pyramid when these air shafts were blocked up with sand and debris. The heat was unbearable and the humidity inside the structure was at very, very uncomfortable levels. Now, these air shafts were eventually cleared in 1837 by Colonel Howard Vyse, and he did this by punching down with a battering ram from outside the pyramid where the northern shaft exits the pyramid. And this northern air shaft, where it exits, there's a place called the Man Killer Shaft, because it was so bloody dangerous, and they were up there punching down with a battering ram. But when Colonel Vyse eventually managed to batter this debris through and punch through, it blew it all down inside the pyramid and filled the entire inside of the Great Pyramid with dust, which made it quite impossible to breathe inside the structure for a short while. But when the dust settled and the air cleared, the airflow provided by these air shafts reduced humidity and made it extremely easy to breathe inside the Great Pyramid for the first time in millennia. This is proof of the function of air shafts. Now, the notion that these were star shafts or places for the pharaoh's soul or Ba to ascend is fanciful nonsense. And in addition, while I'm on my feet, these shafts do not point to certain specific stars that were significant to the ancient Egyptians. This is again horse manure made up to sell a book or hide a truth. Moving to the north of the King's Chamber, or to the right in this image, we come to the top of an internal structure called the Grand Gallery. Now, this Grand Gallery is essentially a huge defence mechanism or trap, and the idea is that there would have been huge stones at the top of the Grand Gallery that were wedged in place, and if a foreign raiding party came into Egypt to lightly molest, a smash and grab party if you will, they used to come in, take and then leave again. But if a raiding party came in and headed for the Great Pyramid, they would spring the trap, seal off the upper chambers of the Great Pyramid, and it would take months for the raiding party to dig their way in. And by that time, the locals would have built their own army up and kicked them out of Dodge, if you like. So the Grand Gallery is a defence mechanism. It's a huge structure at an angle with a corbelled ceiling. It's fascinating. But here we are standing where the arrow is at the top of the Grand Gallery. The top of the Grand Gallery is quite likely one of the most important places in the whole structure, because when you're at the top of the Grand Gallery, you're standing on top of a primordial pyramid. And I'll come on to that a little bit more in a moment. All will become clear. Moving down the Grand Gallery, we come to an intersection at the bottom. One of the passageways leads across to the south to the Queen's Chamber, which is a very important chapel, and you're probably starting to see the primordial pyramid now. The Queen's Chamber is bang smack in the middle of a smaller primordial pyramid that existed before the Great Pyramid was enlarged. The Queen's Chamber has two air shafts that don't reach the outside of the pyramid. Now, these air shafts would have originally reached the outside of the pyramid, but as the pyramid was enlarged, eventually they became redundant when the King's Chamber was built. Moving back along the passageway of the Queen's Chamber, back to the intersection point at the bottom of the Grand Gallery, we have the top of the well shaft, which is the top of an extended well which leads from the bedrock below, the site of a former holy well, which I've spoken about in the previous videos in great detail. The other passageway you can travel down here is called the Ascending Passage. And the Ascending Passage, if we go back down it, it leads to the Descending Passage, which is a long corridor that leads all the way down to the subterranean chamber. Now the subterranean chamber, as I've previously explained in other parts of this video, is a lower subterranean ritual or holy well site, a deeper subterranean well that was dug to chase down further the holy water as the water table continued lowering in antiquity. If we travel all the way back up the descending passage, we come to the main entrance of the pyramid. Now, you don't enter through the main entrance anymore, you enter through a smaller passageway called the Robbers' Tunnel, which was built by the Caliph al-Mamun when they forced their way in, or forced their way out, in antiquity. Slightly above the Robbers' Tunnel is the main entrance with the descending passage, but there's this small little passageway that leads to nowhere just above. This is the Scan Pyramids void space that was found in 2023. Incidentally, I was there on the Giza plateau when they drilled in with a small drill and took these images, proving that the muon scanning and the void space that they thought they had found was actually a real space inside the pyramid. Now this passageway appears to go to nowhere, but look closer. What does it line up with? It lines up perfectly with the passageway leading to the Queen's Chamber. So if I put this passageway in, that doesn't exist, you can see how this would have led straight from the original main entrance of the pyramid straight into the Queen's Chamber. Why this was blocked up or closed off in antiquity, I don't know. This might have been several stages of pyramid construction, and it became redundant at some point. Let's take a closer look at the bedrock beneath the Great Pyramid. So this is the bedrock beneath the Great Pyramid. You'll see it's not completely flat. Now, given the effort that they went to lay huge paving stones all the way around the Great Pyramid site, there's a reason why they didn't bother levelling out this primordial mound that existed before. Now, this 15-metre high bedrock mound inside the pyramid, there was as previously said in different parts of this video earlier on, there was a holy well site there with a little grotto, and the well was chased down over antiquity. But take a look here. If you draw a pyramid that lines up perfectly with that primordial mound, with that 15-metre high bedrock mound, you get a small primordial pyramid that gives us the Queen's Chamber directly in the centre, and also it lines up perfectly with the Grand Gallery. So perhaps when Khufu enlarged the pyramid, the existing primordial pyramid was a natural ramp that they used to get the huge stones up to the King's Chamber. And the Grand Gallery has been built on top of, for function and form, on top of that former pyramid. So as I said earlier, when you're standing at the top of the Grand Gallery, you're standing on top of a former primordial pyramid, an absolutely divine place. Everyone wants to climb a pyramid, don't they? And lots of people have been inside the Great Pyramid and climbed up the Grand Gallery. And then when you're standing at the top, everyone's in a rush to get into the King's Chamber. Has anyone ever paused at the top of the Grand Gallery and realised they're standing on the top of an ancient holy pyramid? So I said in the previous part to this video that it's extremely unlikely that Khufu built the Great Pyramid from scratch, from the ground up, in a mere 23 years. We have absolute objective proof that pyramids around the world were built in stages over very, very long periods of time. The pyramids in Mesoamerica, for instance. Now we know that those pyramids were built and enlarged slowly over hundreds of years in many cases, because people have driven bulldozers into them. Because archaeology, it ain't quite so good in Mexico. They want to build a road, they go straight for a pyramid. Or the conquistadors, when Cortes took his people, the conquistadors, over to South America. They raped, they pillaged, they destroyed, they turned ancient pyramids into churches. And even in Egypt, 45 miles from Giza, there's the pyramid at Meidum. And when you go down the descending passage inside that pyramid, you can clearly see where the main entrance was of at least 2 other pyramids, possibly even 3, as it was made in 3 different stages. Could an entire nation have built the Great Pyramid from scratch in 23 years? Could we? Could we do it with copper chisels? It stands to reason that this structure was built in stages. And to suggest otherwise plays into the hands of ancient alien nutters and conspiracy Luddites. If there was a primordial pyramid at Giza, it could have been the inspiration for the step pyramid of Saqqara. And let's not forget that the step pyramid that lays underneath Silbury Hill in Avebury in Wiltshire in the United Kingdom was built at the same time as the Great Pyramid 4,500 years ago. Is there a connection here? I believe there is. I don't wish to take anything away from the Pharaoh Khufu or his chief architect, because in building the Great Pyramid and enlarging what was already there, they likely encoded sacred geometry into that structure. And that, my dear friends, is the subject for another video. Right, I'm going to have to stop right here. I think I'm going to leave this one right where it is now, because I think I've dug a big enough hole for myself with this entire subject that there is so much more I want to say about primordial pyramids and the Great Pyramid and all of that stuff. But I'm going to leave it here and give you a chance to have a good think about it. Maybe contemplate, put some stuff in the comments if you will. I'm Steve, this is Holy Well Holy Temple, and this has been Bright Weird. Thanks for watching.